So Resident Evil Code Veronica is a very weird game. It's a very strange game, and so because of that I find myself asking the question, is Resident Evil Code Veronica too weird to be scary? You don't really hear that much about Code Veronica at this point because it's not a numbered entry in the series, like Resident Evil 1, Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3, Resident Evil 4. I'm not going to continue this joke. And so Code Veronica is kind of a weird game just because it sounds like a spin-off, just because it doesn't have a number in its title. From what I understand, the reason why Resident Evil 3 was Resident Evil 3 was because Capcom had struck a deal with Sony to develop 3 Resident Evil games for the PlayStation 1, but at that point, Code Veronica was already in development for the Dreamcast. You know, that famous console that lives on to this day, right? So Code Veronica is really kind of the true follow-up to Resident Evil 2. This game stars Claire from Resident Evil 2, and it also stars Chris from Resident Evil 1, and this was before he started punching boulders, just so you're well aware. So in Resident Evil 2, the entire reason why Claire goes to Raccoon City is because she's trying to find Chris, her brother. And then you find a note from him, and he's like, hey, I'm off in Europe, I'm trying to defeat Umbrella, basically. And Umbrella, of course, are the zombie people, you know them. They make zombies. And also I think they probably make like ibuprofen capsules or something, but you know, they also make hunters, and you know, that's more what they're known for, less so the allergy putting you to sleep kind of pill business, more the giant monsters. Chris and Claire are trying to defeat Umbrella and take down that corporation because they are ignorant to the fact that the stock market will do it for them. And I'll speak more on that idea later, but yeah, it's silly. There are a lot of people who really love this game and a lot of people who don't like the game so much. And honestly, it makes sense. The game does some really weird things. It has some weird level designs. The game has some really weird puzzles, and like they're weird even by Resident Evil standards. A lot of the enemies are goofy. I think there are some story missteps with how they handle Alfred, for instance, who's the villain for half of the game. So I'd played this game once before, but going into it, I was kind of struck by the fact that it's like, oh yeah, this is Resident Evil. I've mentioned this before in other videos, but something is only scary the first time you see it. The first time you see Pyramid Head, it's like, oh my gosh, who is this guy? But then by the 500th time you've seen him, you're just like, oh yeah, it's Pyramid Head. It's just a guy. In essence, familiarity with something takes away your fear of it. And so because of that, for me at least, the zombies were never going to be scary. Some of the enemies they bring in later, like the hunters, are ones that I've seen before, and so I'm like, I don't really care that much. They're not scary to me. And then with other enemies, you really kind of do hit the point where it's like, this is more weird than scary. So for instance, I'm thinking of the golden zombie guys who are one-armed. I don't know their name. They're just the one-armed golden zombie guys. That's how I know them by. Basically, they have one arm and they stretch like Mr. Fantastic or something. Their main attacks are to whack Claire and then to shake her head like she's a newborn. It's kind of messed up for Capcom to put something like that in the game, but I digress. I think these guys are just more weird than scary because you look at them and you're like, wow, these are golden zombies. Okay, is this supposed to be scary? You see zombie dogs, because of course you do, because they're in every single survival horror game ever. There are some giant spiders. I'm gonna be honest, I don't like those. I don't like giant spiders. They're gross. I had a dream a few nights back about there being a bunch of like big spiders in my house, and I didn't like it. It was very scary. So I'm not a fan of the spiders. So it's like, you got me there, Capcom. Because they're really goofy. They're just like spiders, but big. And also they shoot out acid. And then there's a really, really big one, and he has an eye in his butt. So that's pretty good. I don't think it's considered his butt, but like his back half is his butt. There's an eye there. Thorax, is that right? I don't think so. His abdomen, his butt, his big butt, his eye butt, big eye butt, but with an eye on it. That's a scary thought, but with an eye on it, that's gross. I don't think I can put up a picture for that. Imagine if someone's butt opened and there was an eye there. There's a giant sandworm enemy. This one was kind of weird because I wasn't expecting it. Like, I've played through the game before, but I just forgot about the fact that they just had giant sandworms in Resident Evil, I guess. At the very beginning of Chris's section, you run into Rodrigo, I think is his name. He's the guy who is Claire's jailer initially. So anyways, Chris finds him away from the jail in this dank cave, right? And he talks to him, and then this giant sandworm comes up and eats him. And even though this guy obviously gets fully devoured, Chris's response is, I have to go save him. So, good on you. Good on you for trying to save him from the clutches of death, I guess. And I realized this after I beat the game. I didn't save that guy. I don't know how you were supposed to, but in light of that, in light of knowing that I didn't save him, it just makes Chris's, I have to save him, look absolutely pathetic. And so I feel kind of bad now because I think you are supposed to save that guy, but I just don't know how because the game's puzzles are weird. I probably missed like a big side area or something. I don't know. Here are the instructions for how to actually save the guy. So I wanted to talk about the story a little bit more in depth, particularly with Alfred, one of the villains. There have been a lot of remakes of Resident Evil games in recent years, and they've been pretty solid overall. As I've said before, the Resident Evil 4 one is, in my opinion, the best Resident Evil game. And so because of that, I would love to just see more remakes. I don't like remakes in general that much, but Capcom has been doing a great job with them, so keep them coming. But there's been a lot of debate as to whether or not this game, Code Veronica, would ever get remade. And as I mentioned, it's a game that is kind of not really beloved in the same way that Resident Evil 1 or 2 is. And also it's unnumbered, and so I think because of that, it kind of falls in there with Revelations in the sense that it's kind of forgotten about. But perhaps I think the greatest reason I've seen people argue that this game will not get remade is because of Alfred. So there are basically 3 main villains in the game, and one of them is Alfred Ashford. He belongs to the prestigious Ashford family who helped to found Umbrella along with Oswald Spencer. Alfred has a twin sister, Alexia, who is another one of the big bads of the game. And so it's Alfred who you really see for the majority of the first half of the game. The first half of this game is mainly set on this island that is a military base that Umbrella uses to train guys in the Ashford estate, I guess. The Ashford mansion is located there. And so already at the beginning of the game, the military base is all screwed up. And so Alfred believes that it is you who have screwed it up and you who have attacked the island. And so Alfred accuses Claire of causing all this damage and of making a mess of everything. Claire, of course, is like, what are you talking about? I was arrested by this army. And by the way, the opening cinematic of the game is kind of insane because it shows Claire dropping a gun while she's being held at gunpoint. And then she falls faster than the gun and then grabs the gun and shoots it at a barrel that's behind a bunch of dudes. And it's like, this is absurd. For the record, it says that Claire in this game is 19 years old. How is this 19-year-old girl doing John Wick moves? But anyways, back to Alfred. And then you find out that Alfred has a twin sister, Alexia, who shows up at different points. Then at one point you are attacked by Alexia, who then disappears, and then Alfred shows up, only he is wearing makeup. That's when you then realize that the Alexia you have seen up until that point is actually Alfred putting on a dress and wearing makeup. Whenever this character, Alfred, is confronted with the fact that he is wearing makeup, he responds like this.
What? No!
Wait a second. What just happened?
And then Claire is kind of mean about it and says this.
Oh, Alfred, you cross-dressing freak!
And so I think because of this line and because of this entire interaction, this character Alfred is interpreted as being transgender, but I guess I have a different interpretation of the character. So it shows up more in the back half of the game, but there's this idea of a queen ant that is talked about a lot. Basically, Alexia, who's this literal genius who has transformed herself into a superhuman. I'm talking about the real Alexia, by the way, not Alfred dressed up. Basically, that Alexia sees herself as a queen ant, and she wants the entire world to be subservient to her. She wants every single other living organism to be a worker ant, and she treats Alfred as a worker ant. And Alfred is an interesting character, because for Alexia, he has almost this kind of weird, incestuous dedication towards her. He seems to be completely 100% enamored with her. He writes about her and talks about her the way that one might write about a lover. And it's kind of weird. It's kind of unnerving because there's that element to it. There's that incest sort of element to it. And it's weird because in his notes, Alfred doesn't seem to just love Alexia. He seems to want to worship her, or he seems to worship her. He thinks everything of her and thinks that she's way better than him, and she thinks that she's way better than him. You learn as you progress through the game that the Ashford family name was kind of tarnished by their father, and so Alfred is determined to restore the family's name and their reputation in order to better serve Alexia. And so I say all that to say this. I tend to think that the character of Alfred is misunderstood and misinterpreted, because really I don't think that he is intended to be a transgender person, and therefore I don't think he's intended to be an offensive representation of a transgender person. I think you could probably argue that it's an offensive representation of someone with DID, dissociative identity disorder. It's really hard to say. And maybe he was intended to be trans and the characterization was always intended to offend people, but I don't think so. I really do think that Alfred is kind of intended to be a complicated, strange villain who has this almost incestuous dedication to his sister, but at the same time, I understand why he's come to be interpreted in a different way. I understand why people look at this scene in the game and they go, yeah, this is never getting a remake. I understand why Capcom might look at this and go, yeah, we're not touching it. But I really do think that Alfred is kind of a tragic character because he's one of the two twins and he's not half as smart as Alexia is. His and Alexia's father intended to more or less resurrect their ancestor Veronica, And so that's what Alexia is supposed to be. She's supposed to be the restored version of their older ancestor. And then Alfred was just kind of there. And so I think that you could write him as a very tragic and sad character, a very sympathetic character, honestly. But I just don't think it was handled well here. And I think this is also a prime example of the line between weird and scary. Because this is a weird instance wherein the character as he exists in my head is so much more scary and strange than he actually is in the game. Because he does this in the game. And it's one of those things where I think I'm kind of seeing what he could be as opposed to what he actually is. So, yeah. This game is freaking long. I don't know why they made it so long, but it feels like it's twice as long as every other Resident Evil game, minus like 4 and 6. Some of the puzzles in this game are really obtuse. Some of them are very clever, and they gave me that feeling whenever I solved them, where I'm like, wow, I'm so smart. I solved the Resident Evil puzzle. And it's kind of silly, you know, whatever, but it gave me some sense of satisfaction at 11 p.m. at night whenever I was playing the game instead of going to bed. Which, by the way, it's, 11:30 right now, so I should be in bed, but I'm filming this and I'm pretty tired, so... This game is actually really important for the story, and so whenever people talk about remakes and remaking this game, they kind of talk about it because it is a necessary step in between Resident Evil 1, whenever Wesker first appears, and then Resident Evil 4 and 5, where he sort of becomes the villain of the franchise. So this game is really important for the story of Resident Evil, if you give a crap about that sort of thing, which, by the way, I like care immensely about the story of Resident Evil. Like, I don't understand half of it, because there are just so many viruses that are just made up, and they all have stupid names. There's like the T virus, there's the G virus, there's the C virus, there's the T Veronica virus, there's the T of this virus, and then we're not even getting into parasites or molds. So it's nonsense, but still, I love it. I love it. I'm a big fan. So this game is really important for the franchise of Resident Evil because, like I said, it was actually intended more or less to be the third game in the series. So they bring back Wesker from the first game, who was dead at the end of the first game because he gets killed by his own creation, the Tyrant.
Don't come this way! No!
But they bring him back and he has superpowers. And it's not explained how he comes back. So anyways, he's just back again and he has weird cat eyes and he jumps really high and stuff. And then he meets Chris and he hates Chris and he wants to kill Chris. And it's kind of unclear why. I'm not the first one to say this, but it only makes sense for Wesker to hate Chris so much because Chris laughed at him.
This is the ultimate life form. Tyrant! Chris? Stop it.
So anyways, Wesker is back and he has superpowers and they're not explained. And then at the end of the game, it's actually kind of hype. Basically, you defeat the final boss, which, just as an aside, that final boss is freaking awful. I'm not gonna lie, I cheated to beat the game. There's an item duplication glitch that you can do in this game, and I've played it twice and I've used the item duplication glitch both times just because the game is like really hard at the beginning. And then it's like the final boss, I don't even know how you're supposed to beat it without cheating because you just get stun locked constantly. Fighting Alexia as Chris is like harder than Dark Souls. It's just nonsense because she's constantly stun locking you. So Chris beats Alexia and then he goes down there and then he finds Wesker holding Claire. And at this point in the game, Wesker already beat the crap out of Claire once. And so Chris sees this and understandably gets mad at Wesker for holding on to his sister. And so then Chris and Wesker are like, oh, let's finish this. Let's fight. And then you think that there's gonna be a big action hero moment where Chris goes and then he defeats Wesker and he saves the day. But he gets his butt handed to him by Wesker. And if you're wondering why Chris is so jacked from Resident Evil 5 onwards, it's because of this. Like, literally, the reason why is because of this. And so I love it because it's a total subversion of expectations because you're expecting Chris, he just defeated the final boss after all, you're expecting him to go and beat the crap out of Wesker, but that's not at all what happens. So if you're gonna remake 5, this game is actually kind of important story-wise, so that way you understand why Wesker and Chris hate each other. But at the same time, it's like, if they don't remake Code Veronica, then, you know, whatever. I'm sure the remake of 5 will sell well. For many years, I think Resident Evil 5 was the top-selling Resident Evil game anyways, so it's not like people care, I guess. I think there's a lot of evil laughter in this game. A lot of the villains just laugh evilly at random times. There's one cutscene that actually made me burst out laughing out loud. Basically, Wesker is doing an evil laugh, and then his evil laugh is interrupted by Alexia's evil laugh. And so yeah, this is like one of the silliest moments in the game and I just can't take it seriously. And honestly, a better title for this video might just be, is Resident Evil Code Veronica too silly to be scary? One thing I want to talk about real quick is the ending, because it promises something that is never actually delivered on. Basically, Claire and Chris escape the entire situation, they're together, they're in this fighter jet, and they're flying off. And Chris has this big dramatic moment.
Yeah, it's payback time. We've got to destroy Umbrella. Now, let's finish this once and for all.
And so I imagine the way it would go if you knew nothing about the other Resident Evil games is just you would play this and then you would go, wow, I can't wait to finally defeat Umbrella, to finally take down the bad guys. And then you go and you pop in the next game in the series chronologically, which is Resident Evil 4, and then it starts off with this.
The United States government issued an indefinite suspension of business decree to Umbrella. Soon its stock prices crashed, and for all intents and purposes, Umbrella was finished.
And it's like, Umbrella just freaking died because their stock price crashed. And it's like, that's it. That's what it took. It's the stock price. That's what killed the main villain. I can't really name another instance of something like this happening in another series. I feel like a fair comparison to this would be if you watched a Batman movie and he and the Joker fought the entire time, and then Batman goes to have a final confrontation with the Joker, and then it turns out the Joker died in a car accident. And it's like, what? This is not a satisfying resolution to the story. This was not supposed to be how it happened. But I think the thing is that like Resident Evil 4 is like so freaking good. Like it's the best game in the series. Like the only game in the series that was good enough to dethrone Resident Evil 4 as the best in the series was Resident Evil 4. Resident Evil 4 had to defeat Resident Evil 4. Resident Evil 4 is the only game good enough to top Resident Evil 4. And it's crazy because I love Resident Evil 4 like so much, and I played it like 9 times or something like that. But Resident Evil 4 is just too good. Okay, enough of that. But the ending to this game is not really satisfying, knowing what comes up next. It's kind of just like, well, Umbrella's gone. Okay. But also I think they are kind of able to get away with doing Umbrella like this just because of the fact that there isn't really a great face of Umbrella. You know, there is Spencer, but he gets taken care of in Resident Evil 5. He's like, I was to become a god. And then Wesker has his hand through his chest and he goes, that right is now mine. Leave a comment down below if you would like to see me reenact the entirety of Resident Evil 5. Or 4, I don't care, I'll do it. You want to see me do 4?
No way, bro.
I do think this game is really intricately put together from a gameplay perspective. The game maps are so big and they're so much larger than like all the other Resident Evil games. You have to backtrack a lot in this game, and there are certain points where it's like, wait, you mean I have to backtrack like all the way to almost the beginning of the area? And it's kind of absurd, if I'm being honest. But while I was playing the game, I was definitely struck by the fact that it is so well pieced together. For the most part, at least, because there are so many ways in which you can soft lock yourself. In fact, that is the #1 complaint I see about this game, is that people talk about soft locking themselves and having to restart the game. It sounds like a lot of people got stuck on the Alexia boss fight and just couldn't finish it because they didn't have enough supplies. A lot of people screwed themselves over because midway through the game, you're playing as Claire, and then you go into a boss fight and you have her weapons, and then you defeat the boss, and then you switch over to Chris, but you don't get Claire's weapons. And so they stick with her, and then you have one more point where you can play as Claire and give the items back to Chris if you want. But then otherwise it's like, nah. And so you just don't get the weapons that Claire has, that you used as Claire. So for me, I was not able to use the bowgun or the grenade launcher for the entire time as Chris, just because Claire had them. So there are some weird design choices like that. I think that the character switching idea is kind of interesting, but I don't think they pull it off here. I think there's a lot of backtracking, and there's always backtracking in survival horror, but I do think that there's like a lot in this game just because the areas are so big and so it feels like a lot. Really, this has been a weird, rambly video, and I know that, so thank you for watching and sticking around till the end. The reason why it's been a weird, rambly video is because this game is weird, and so I don't know how exactly to talk about it. It's a game that's frustrating in a lot of ways because I wish that some aspects of the story, like Alfred, were handled better. And I wish some enemy designs were just straight up axed, like the golden Mr. Fantastic guys. Those are stupid, we don't need those. But there would be points whenever I was playing through the game and I would kind of get into the groove and I would be like, yeah, this is awesome. Like, this is peak survival horror. And then, you know, something stupid would happen and then it would kind of take me out of it, and the game wouldn't be enjoyable or scary. And so I think it's just one of those instances where it kind of makes me sad, this game does. Because I think that there are a lot of great, fantastic components. I think that there are legitimately scary things about the game, and I think that if you rework the story a little bit, I think that you'd have something really, really interesting and creepy. And so I feel like all the pieces are there for there to be something great, but then at the same time, there's just too much garbage in the game. There are just too many stupid little things. I think there are things that are really cool about the game. I really like Chris and Wesker's relationship in this game, and I think it's a lot of fun to play as Claire. Claire meets up with a dude named Steve, and Steve and her actually have a really solid arc, I think. I think that Steve is just kind of acted poorly. He's supposed to be a kind of dorky kid, but they overdo it in this, I think. So at the end of the day, it's like, is this game too weird to be scary, or is it too silly to be scary? Yeah, I think so. I think so, honestly. But also, I've never found Resident Evil to be all that scary. It certainly has its moments as a series, like 100%. But I don't find it scary in the same way that I do something like Silent Hill. But also, that's just a very subjective, personal view of things. And obviously, that's what it is. It's my opinion. So your mileage may vary. But I played through this game because I'm anticipating that either they will remake it or they won't. And I think that the answer as to what they'll do will become obvious very soon. So it's like one of those things where it's like, if they don't remake it, then I understand why, because quite frankly, it's not the best remembered game in the series. But at the same time, if they do remake it, that would be really cool, because I think that there are a lot of opportunities to kind of clean away some of the garbage that this game has. I think you would be able to do justice to the characters and justice to the story, and I think that you'd be able to make the Resident Evil franchise as a whole feel more cohesive in the same way that they've made 2, 3, and 4 feel more cohesive through their remakes. But as it stands now, it just feels like Code Veronica has too many problems compared to every other game in the series. Or I won't say every other game, because like Resident Evil 6 is a mess. It certainly has a lot more problems than like the first, 4 or 5 games, depending on how you view them. It certainly isn't as good as the Resident Evil 1 remake, which I think is probably the best survival horror title ever, behind the second Silent Hill game, because of course Silent Hill 2 is number 1. Signalis is probably up there too at this point, but kind of love that game. But in conclusion, thank you for watching this weird mess of a video. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly didn't cover everything that you could talk about with Resident Evil Code Veronica. I didn't even cover most of it, but I wanted to talk about things that stuck out to me the most. So I hope you enjoyed it. So thank you. Have a nice night. Bye. Leon! Leon! Help! Help! Leon! Leon, help! Help! 7 minutes. 7 minutes is all I need.